Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the first Toolkits Nonfiction live session. Today we're with Ruby-Rose Pivet-Marsh, and we're going to be talking about writers' festivals. I'm dialing in from Wurundjeri country this evening and pay my respects to any First Peoples in the audience, either live or watching back over this after the fact. I encourage you all to share in the chat where you're located right now, and I wanted to ask Ruby, where are you dialing in from?
I'm also in Wurundjeri country.
Great. So to share a bit about myself and my relationship to industry before we get started, I am this year's Toolkits nonfiction facilitator, and I've been living in so-called Australia since 2016, and publishing since 2019, and teaching since 2021. I write nonfiction, poetry, and a little bit of literary criticism. And I also think it's worth mentioning that I've worked as a creative producer since 2021 and just recently wrapped up my time with the Emerging Writers Festival where Ruby works. Ruby, it's good to see you again.
Yeah, you too.
And yes, so today we'll be chatting to Ruby-Rose Pivet-Marsh, who's a writer, producer, and arts worker living and creating on unceded Wurundjeri land. Ruby is currently the artistic director and co-CEO of the Emerging Writers Festival and is a co-founder of the Latinx art collective Yo Soy. Some quick housekeeping before we get into the session itself. A little bit about Toolkits Connect. It's a 12-week program for writers aged 30 and under to develop their skills in a unique and exciting online environment. Toolkits is run by Express Media. Express has been around for over 30 years now, developing, supporting, and promoting young writers through workshops that develop skills, through opportunities for constructive feedback and publication, like VoiceWorks, and through awards and programs that recognize excellence. Toolkits Connect is generously supported by Copyright Cultural Fund and Australia Poetry. This session will be live on YouTube will be available on YouTube as a resource and will be live captioned in the coming days. If you'd like to ask any questions, which we encourage throughout this session, you can do so on Twitter using the hashtag EMToolkits or via the live chat section on YouTube. Feel free to ask any relevant questions as we go along. We'll also have maybe 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the session allocated specifically to Q&A for any that don't come up organically as Ruby and I are chatting. So, welcome. Let's start with the foundations. Ruby, what defines a writers' festival? What can a writers' festival be?
Yeah, just no easy questions right off the bat. I think it's kind of hard to answer because my experience of a writers' festival is, I think, maybe a bit different to a typical one. So basically, the big writers' festivals, I think of them as readers' festivals. So, which is great. I'm not trying to knock any of that, but like basically the difference would be you go because you've read maybe a book that you enjoyed. I would say typically they have kind of more established writers involved. So you go to a session, you hear an author you like speak, you get your book signed, that kind of vibe, which is really important. But I think that when I think about, what is a writers' festival, Emerging Writers Festival is a bit different, and there are a couple of others as well, where we are a festival for writers. So it's more about the development of craft and professional kind of contacts, professional development, and networking, for want of a better word, and showcasing writing talent. Yeah. I don't know if that really answers the question.
No, it does. It's very helpful. I've got like 2 offshoot questions from that. Maybe the first one is for you to give a brief overview on the Emerging Writers Festival, like a quick blurb, and then I'll ask my second question.
Okay, cool. So I started at the Emerging Writers Festival in 2018 as a creative producer, which was an internship program that we ran for a very long time, and it was really invaluable. I had never worked in the literary arts before. I was working in a music, all ages music capacity. Capacity at a council. That was my previous kind of events experience, and I had studied a communications degree, and within that, creative writing. But I had never sort of thought to put them together. So I found the Emerging Writers Festival. I did the internship, which I know you asked about EWF, but it's like the trajectory is really, I think, a good like way of encapsulating what EWF is, where it's a developmental organization. So we in the past, we're kind of rethinking how we do internships, as I think most people are or should be. So I was an intern, then I was a producer, and then I was a coordinator, and now I'm the artistic director and a CEO. And that's kind of what we like to see. What we love to see at EWF is like, you know, your involvement was as an artist, and then as a program advisory committee member, and then as a producer. Like, that's kind of really indicative of EWF. So we started actually out of Express Media in 2003 as a zine fair. So yeah, EWF hit 20 years this year. We're a festival for and by and about writers and writing, and that kind of can be of any experience, any background. We often get people saying things like, what is an emerging writer? And I find it really interesting because I think oftentimes, and it's funny because we're, you know, this is Express Media and it's a youth focused organization, but we don't really see it as an age based thing either. You can emerge at any age as a writer.
I remember working at a different arts org a few years back, and we had this conversation around like definers of, because oftentimes grants are specifically allocated for emerging writers, but it's so tricky to pin down. Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's like there's emerging, and then another term that people use is early career. But then how do you define early career when, you know, if you've been doing something in the background quite I don't know, inconsistently, or and then you decide to set the time to focus on it as like a career. I don't know, it becomes difficult. And I remember us talking about when we were like programming earlier this year, wanting to put an artist on and then having conversations around like, oh, are they still technically emerging? Like what is that? And maybe a question is, how do you define emerging as like an emerging writer?
Well, it's funny because we ask people to self-nominate what they believe. And every year we get applications and we read through all the applications. And sometimes I kind of do a double take and I'm like, why did you select that you were emerging? We have 3 options, which is limiting. It's emerging for us. It lists emerging, mid-career, and established. So we don't like sort of, you know, bar people because they're no longer emerging in our eyes. They usually end up being hosts or teachers, mentors, things like that within the program. But yeah, sometimes there'll be people who have like published books, not even their debut books, like have published 1 or 2 novels, 2 or 3 novels, and they will still self-identify as emerging. And I find that really interesting, because sometimes, you know, you can be writing in one practice in one form for a really long time, and then suddenly you want to try your hand at something else, or and then you become emerging all over again as a writer, but in a different form or genre. And I think that that's interesting. I think, you know, I mentioned before, and you did as well, the 5 years first 5 years of your practice thing is really weird, because how do you measure your practice, right? Is it when you first pitch something? Is it when you first are published on in a journal? Is it when you do your first event or something like that? And it's just really kind of ephemeral. I think if you feel you're emerging, you should be allowed to work on building yourself up more, you know.
Totally.
I'm an emerging writer. I consider myself an emerging writer, and part of that is also because it's hard to find time to work on your craft when you're
That's it too. And I mean, how many people are writers full time?
Exactly.
And I think maybe that's what breaks you out of the emerging category, or at least in my mind, which I know is quite a capitalistic term, or like a capitalistic framework for it. But in my mind, I'm like, I want to be a writer that can be a writer and have nothing else to kind of pay my bills. But that is not an option unless you're established. And oftentimes established writers aren't even afforded that luxury. And then maybe that in turn is why it is such a tricky thing to define, because even established writers or writers who have 2 or 3 novels out are not able to use that as their primary income.
Yeah, definitely not. And I think especially here in so-called Australia. I was talking to a friend who, they work, a full-time job or a 3-day-a-week job, and still are people who are, producing a novel every 18 months or something like that, and still, cannot sustain a life on that alone, which is a whole other thing.
Yes, I think it's just the rates of pay in Australia are not up to like on par with the US, for example, and also opportunities maybe for writers. Like there's opportunities for emerging writers, and then there are opportunities for established writers. But then when you're in that
exactly
holding pattern in the middle, that's why I'm like, maybe in other places you and I would not be considered emerging writers, but the infrastructure means that we are.
Yeah. Well, I know, and I know people who have said, that they didn't feel as, like, across the board, like generalizations, that their second book, that they were as supported by industry in their second book as they were in their debut, and then it's just kind of like they were left swimming, trying to treading water, basically trying to figure it out. And it's like, so you publish one novel and you get a lot of support for that. You don't get much on your second. Where do you go from there?
People love a debut novel. They love like a debut work, and then and then once that's out, then like your sophomore book never sells, or very seldom sells as well. Or like getting a book deal even is harder.
About debut novels all the time. It's interesting.
No, definitely. I wanted to ask, because I remember we chatted a little bit earlier before the session started about EWF and the National Young Writers Festival being the only ones that really you can apply for. So maybe, I mean, there's so much to say about those 2 festivals, but maybe let's talk about the fact that they are developed for writers and that to attend as well, not just readers, but then also what those festivals look like in practice in comparison to let's say Sydney or Melbourne Writers Festival, for example.
So I can only really speak to, I guess, EWF as an experience that I've had. I know that my colleague Jess Layton has worked at National Young Writers Festival, and I apologize, I will probably call it National Young Writers Conference because EWF runs the National Writers Conference. But actually, NYWF also started from Express Media. And it was around the same time, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But something around the same time. And there has been a long history of overlap between the 2 organizations. A lot of former directors, I can think of a couple, but like, former directors from NYWF then went on to be directors at EWF or producers at EWF and things like that. So we both do call outs, I think, and again, I'm not 100% certain on this, the National Young Writers maybe is a bit more open source, a bit more like a fringe than EWF is more curated. Neither is better than the other. I think that's just what the difference between our 2 festivals might be, and I'm really sorry if I'm wrong. I have never been because of a number of reasons, because when I was kind of young enough to go, I was working 3 other jobs and I couldn't. And that was something that really frustrated me, and it frustrates me still, but it frustrated me a lot because it was interstate and, you know, all well and good. I love that for everyone going, but I was also like, I can't take time off work. I actually can't do it. Like, yeah, anyway, so I've never been to NYWF, but it always looks really good. So so from what I know, they have people pitch events to them and then they run them. And the people kind of organize that themselves. You've been before.
I went back in 2019 as because I don't think I applied that year. I just went as an attendee.
Okay,
But then I also, like, I was going anyway, and so because I was there and VoiceWorks had a launch, then I did a reading, but I wasn't on the festival lineup or anything. But you're right in that it operates, it is more open source, and it is, I think, because it's not only interstate, but it's in Newcastle, and so a lot of the demographic are in town specifically for the festival. It's not many Newcastle residents, which then means that it becomes like communal or like school campy in a way.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking.
Because everyone's there out of town meeting each other for a specific period of time as well. And a lot of the riders and attendees as well will stay at the same hostel, and so it feels like a good opportunity if you're like trying to meet people and make friends who are also riders, so that you can then, you know, hold each other accountable, send work, feel have similar experiences within breaking into the industry. And then I think, I may also be wrong about this, but I do believe that all of the events are free.
I think so,
and almost all, if not all, operate out of the Newcastle Library as well. So there's like, that's that one festival hub where everything happens.
Whereas, so for context, Emerging Writers Festival, we have an open artist call out that we put up usually between November and December. We have it open for a month, and then we ask people to pitch, you know, not only what they want to do at the festival, but themselves, like as like, you know, their general interests. If they have any ideas of events, who else they would like to work with or see at the festival. So it's not just like about who you are and what you would like to be in. It's also about what would benefit you to learn or to see in the festival. And I think, that's kind of what sets us apart, both our festivals apart from other festivals, is, you know, we are very specifically for writers, whether it's asking them what they want to do or asking them what they want to see and participate in. I will say, you know, we used to have a more in-person gathering with the National Writers Conference, which was a weekend in between our 2 festival weeks, but for obvious reasons that didn't happen in person in 2020 or 21. And then it made far more sense to me for it to be online. So we have maintained it as an online event because more people can access it that way. And you don't have to be in Melbourne. You don't have to get to Melbourne for that weekend. But it is like a catch-22, because then we miss out on that kind of community strengthening aspect of being physically in one space together.
I wonder as well if that's another thing that sets the Emerging Writers Festival apart from others, like National Young Writers Festival included, in that it does have such a big digital presence, which means that audiences don't necessarily need to be in Metro Melbourne specifically, like not even just in Victoria, but in Melbourne, but in Metro Melbourne, to be able to engage with it. So maybe that's worth mentioning, just like explicitly, that, you know, just because you don't need to be based in Melbourne to apply to or participate in the festival, either as an artist or as an attendee.
And that's something that we've been doing since 2014. I think a lot of people might be surprised to know that, but we actually ran the Digital Writers Festival from 2014 to 2019. So I worked on the 2019 festival, which was the last one, and then of the Digital Writers Festival. And then the next year, obviously, we went into lockdowns, and EWF was not to, you know, to our own horn or anything, but an industry kind of leader in having online literary events specifically, which sounds so funny now because we're so used to online events. But, you know, when the lockdown started, we had a lot of other organizations and other festivals asking us, how the hell do we do this? And so we were giving out a lot of resources, by resources, I mean our time and our knowledge that we'd gained over doing that other festival for 4 years or whatever. And so that's something that we rolled into. It was always the plan because that was a specific project grant from 14 to 19. So the plan was always to roll in from 2020 onwards, a bigger digital program. And in 2019, we already had that. But yeah.
Interesting. Yes, that makes sense. I'm going to go back to something that you had mentioned earlier about applying / pitching in EWF. And I wanted to ask more about that for obviously like your festival specifically, but more broadly, what you think makes, let's have the question as a two-parter, which is broadly what makes a good pitch / application, and then specific to EWF, what you guys might be looking for when you are reading applications.
Yeah, so it's really funny. My last 3 pitches have been rejected for essays, so I don't know if I can speak to that at the moment. No, but for an event, like I think it's really across the board, whether it's for a piece of writing or for an event or for a project or something, why you are the person to do it. So whether it's why you are the person to write something, why you are the person to curate something, whatever, is really important and should be upfront, because lots of people have very good ideas. Lots of people have the same ideas. It's about why you are the person who should be telling that story and all of that sort of stuff. And I don't just mean like, you know, for identity reasons or anything like that, but I mean like, do you have the experience to handle, you know, someone else's story with care, for example, and things like that, why you should be that person, who it's for, you know, all of that, like who, what, when, where, why, how kind of thing is really basic but really necessary. And I think anything that's over like 100 words, 150 words as a pitch is no good. Don't take that as gospel, but it's what my eyes kind of slide off the page.
Yes.
If it doesn't grab my attention straight away, then yeah.
What kind of details should be in a pitch if they're pitching an event?
For an event, I think the same thing. It's like so what I always like to say is actually for people to look at our previous programs and say, why does this event make sense for Emerging Writers Festival? Because we do get applications that are great ideas, not for our festival. You know, people will often pitch like a solo event or a solo performance. EWF doesn't do them. I'm not saying that a one-person show is bad, but EWF wants to platform as many people as possible. So if there's a performance event, it's going to have more than one person. We have a limited kind of, not limited really, but, you know, like we have a finite amount of time and we want to have as many people involved as we can in, you know, a reasonable manner. And to me, it is not reasonable to have a one-person performance. So that's like something where it's really clear what we are after and what we're asking for. We put out an info like page every year about it. So we look for, has the idea been done before? Is it interesting? If it has been done before, how is it different this time? And how does it connect to EWF historically or presently, and as a community organizer and as an organization for and by emerging writers. That's what is needed in a pitch, basically. And
then considering that the festival is for emerging or early career writers who might not have heaps of accolades yet, they might not even have published any work yet. And as you know, writers' bios is a part of the application process. What
So my
can
cat
be
is
put in a
here.
Oh, that's cute. I also wanted to just make it a little disclaimer that there is also a cat here that might be
Yeah,
yelling if you
I've
hear
just
him in the
fed her,
background.
so she's very purry and fancy.
Mm.
Yeah.
But yes, so considering that writers who are applying to this specific festival might not have, I guess, content to pad a bio out with, what
Yeah.
should be put in a bio if you don't have any publications under your belt?
My hot take is I don't like having publications in bios.
Yeah. So what should be put in it? Well, what should be in a bio then?
Yeah. Okay. So for starters, yeah, bios, these are all personal, but I think can be general, and maybe you can tell me whether or not you agree. Long bios are out. Please,
Hate 'em.
no.
Yeah.
I don't want to read a paragraph. I think my bio is 2 sentences, and I still think it's too long. I think at one point I just had like Ruby-Rose is a Scorpio. That was for a specific publication, and that made sense for. But yeah, I find it really interesting when people list all of the things they've ever done in their bios. I don't like that. I really, really, but what I don't like more is a self-deprecating bio. I have received bios from people that I think they've thought were funny, and they're just not. They're just actually really, really awful about themselves. And I was like, I know your work. I know you're a good writer. This is not fair to you. So I think it's a balance of, I guess, not overfilling it to a point where it's distracting, I think is what it is when you get to a list of publications. If you don't have them, that's okay. You can just put in what you're interested in. You know, are you a nonfiction writer? Are you a fiction writer? If you are a fiction writer, are you like a specific genre of fiction, like a crime writer and things like that? I think as minority writers, as we have recently been dubbed, pardon me, it's really tempting to also put identifiers in your bio. That's up to, I'm not going to tell people what to put and what not to put. I've definitely had them in mine in the past. I find it is less, it's important for my work, for my own personal context. But I don't necessarily know if it's important for
Well,
a bio.
especially when I think that's it too, where it's like, I don't know that it's relevant to like an event because the Emerging Writers Festival and many festivals aren't programming based on like, there aren't programming events that are like, this is the event for Lebanese people or this, you know what I mean? And,
Yeah.
and another maybe offshoot of that is that when you're applying to a festival, they do have, allocated places to ask
Yeah, to self-identify.
identifiers of right, and that's like around your migrant identity or like your cultural identity, if like queer gender identity, so that can go into those drop down lists.
Yeah.
It might not, and then it's not necessary in a bio because if we are or if the Emerging Writers Festival does happen to program like a queer event, they're not looking to the bio to check. They'd be looking at those identifiers in the spreadsheet that you've chosen in that drop down application process.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh
wait, no, what were you gonna say?
Oh no, I was just thinking about like, because I've definitely had publications in my bio in the past. I've definitely had identifiers. I don't know if it's just like an age thing, whereas I feel a bit more sure of myself and my practice that I don't need to. Like, I think I have context based things in my bio. I have my location, my job.
I think that's really
because
important.
it's relevant.
Putting where you are, putting where you're based in your bio is really important because I feel like if people want to reach out to you for an event or like for something in person or something that's like site specific, it's like a very easy way for them to find out whether or not you're in close proximity to them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I don't know if that answers the question.
Cool. No, that's great. Quickly,
Ruby's pet peeve.
Is it helpful for writers to put in like, or applicants to put in like books and authors they enjoy, or not helpful?
We have a section for that in our specific application.
Okay.
We have a section for like, what are you interested in? Da, da, da. I
Mhm.
think so. And for a number of reasons, like, you know, we may not program someone's event that they pitched specifically, but we're like, oh, we do like their work or the sound of their, or the sound of, you know, what they're interested in through their bio, and also what they're interested in. Do we have an event that they will fit? Oh, they've listed these people as the authors that they enjoy. Yes, let's give them a shot and put them on this event because it fits with like magic realism, and, you know, they've listed, you know, we want to do a queer magic realism event. They've listed Carmen Maria Machado as an influence or as someone that they enjoy reading. That's a big generalization. I don't necessarily think that that's her genre, but whatever, you know, like we know that they will be into. Someone returned a stack of books just earlier, and that's the first one that was on the top. But yeah.
No, I agree. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Quickly before I move on to the next question, does anyone have any relevant questions that they want to ask?
Or irrelevant questions. That's also fun.
Or irrelevant ones, true. Okay. I'll let those filter in, hopefully. And ask, what are some misconceptions about writers' festivals that come from both early career and established writers?
Ooh.
Is that a hard one?
I think maybe that they're intimidating. I certainly thought that.
You don't think they're intimidating?
I think I think they're intimidating because that's a perception, right? I think they are intimidating, but they don't necessarily like need to be, or like not need to be, but like they're not cold. At least our one isn't, I don't think, you know.
And I also think, I mean, bigger ones too, like Melbourne Writers Festival. I participated in it for the first time last year in September, and I was so stressed and nervous about maybe just like not being as professional as I needed to be. But it actually ended up being a very friendly atmosphere and super conversational.
Yeah, and I think that that's a huge thing. And I don't know if it's because it's like this whole like, oh, it's intellectual kind of pedestal-y kind of thing, or what. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's the biggest thing is, they are surprisingly welcoming, is how I feel about writers' festivals. I think the first EWF event I ever went to was a zine making session, which is why maybe or maybe not I have been obsessed with having them in the festival, you know, as part of my like the programs that I work on, because it was so foundational. It was really inviting. It was really like tactile, and it was one of those things where we just all sat in a big room. This is when 1,000 Pound Ben existed. You know, we sat in a big room and like cut up magazines. I was like, this is fucking great. Sorry.
I just realized you swore. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that other than, I think that's probably the biggest one. And then maybe, and this is cheeky of me to say, that they're expensive. If you're around, EWF we have a commitment of like 50% free events. I think most years we actually have about 75% of our events are free. I think the other bigger, you know, the state city festivals are more expensive. And obviously, like you have to get to places. Maybe I take that back.
No, I mean, you're right, though. EWF is one of the more affordable ones. Melbourne Writers Festival. I haven't attended heaps. I know that I went to Adelaide Writers Week earlier this year. That was all free, I believe. And so
I went to.
That's.
I was just going to say, I went to Verb Wellington last year, which was really incredible and very generous. That was through a grant from Creative New Zealand. And that was an incredible festival. I believe that their events are all free as well, from what I can remember.
Which is nice for ones that are further away, because it means that you can like spend, I mean, if you have the money to spare, then you spend the money on getting there and then stay in cheap accommodation or with friends, and then just attend, like have that be like the weekend or week where you're just attending events. So National Young Writers Festival is the same as Adelaide as well.
I guess can I just quickly, that's the other thing, I guess, for EWF, but like for most festivals, I think I'm not sure about National Young Writers, I won't speak for them, but we will pay like for people's flights, and not audiences, but artists. We will pay for artists' flights. I assume that that's the case for all of the others, including NYWF. Sorry, I don't know. I was thinking.
I don't think NYWF. Maybe it does actually. Oh, I don't know.
I don't know. I don't want to speak for them, but EWF, we put up artists. We put their accommodation up. We do their flights, or their publishers do if they're a published author. We work out some kind of thing. So like the artist is not going to be out of pocket for participating in their event. Whether or not they decide they want to go to another event is another thing. I hope that you all can't hear kitchen sounds.
You're all good.
Yeah, go for it.
And just going back on like even festivals like the Melbourne Writers Festival, on you saying that they're not as intimidating as people think. With festivals like the Melbourne Writers Festival and the Sydney Writers Festival, of course there are going to be the big events with the writers like Helen Garner, for example. But at the same time, there are like book launches for grassroots initiatives with 3 early career writers speaking and a very intimate audience, which then means you can engage in the questions and even talk to the writers afterwards as well. So maybe that's something that I think I was surprised to see when I first went to Sydney Writers Festival a few years back, that you can just go up to the artists at the end of their event. They come down from the stage and you can just chat to them.
Even
when they're not
other events.
Hot shots.
Yeah, even at other events that aren't festival events, that are literary events, everyone is, I think, everyone at these events, we're all nerds to some degree, everyone, not to be like, everyone's a little bit socially awkward. I definitely am. There was that meme that was like, the like shrouded figure. And I was like, this is me. And it just says, I'm shy at the bottom. I was like, this is me during all the time. But like, I had it as my profile pic because I was like, this is me during EWF specifically. And I'm so sorry. So like, even though I'm like, they're not as intimidating, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I still get like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Like, that's it too, where it's like, I don't know if it ever wears off that you get nervous at like big events and around big writers. You kind of just have to sit with it and introduce yourself and talk to someone. Okay. Moving on to, in the context of, I guess, emerging writers, because I don't want to speak and be like, now you're programmed for the Melbourne Writers Festival, because that is a lot harder to do. But if you are an artist in a festival, what is a good way to take advantage of that involvement? Yes, like for your practice, so that you can learn more to work into the writing that you do, but also for your career and maybe connections and network.
Attending the events. I know that sounds really basic. And it doesn't have to be the paid ones. In fact, I would say if you're an artist looking, and you're an artist in EWF, for example, and you're looking to meet other people in the events, you go to the morning pages events, the lunchtime, like lunch break events, and or the free nighttime programming. That's where you're going to meet people, and where I feel like the morning and the lunchtime ones are really, I don't want to say overlooked, because they're not. People come to them and love them. But I think they love them for that reason. That's where you're going to meet other people. And it's going to be a facilitated kind of meeting where you're doing something or working on a prompt or something like that. And then there's like the Writers' Night Schools, which are in person as well. I would say that the way you get the most out of it is going to not just going to your own event. And if you do just go to your own event, to like at least introduce yourself to the other artists on the lineup, which can be really, really hard to do. I've been like notoriously bad at that myself. But it's just something you kind of got to do. I think the other thing to get the most out of the festival is like after the fact doing the survey and things like that, because we send out a survey to all of our artists, and I think a lot of the time people think surveys like that are like just a box ticking exercise, and they're truly not. We get a lot from them in terms of knowing what worked and what didn't, in terms of programming and venues and all of that sort of stuff. And I really try to encourage people to make friends. Having a festival buddy is like really useful, because then you can go to stuff together, and you can keep in touch afterwards. Yeah. What do you think? How would you?
I think you're right. I think it's like what you said about introducing yourself to oh wait, okay, yeah, you broke up for a second. Introducing yourself to the artists on the same, lined up on the same program, on the same event as you is great. I also think that it's like I've made the mistake of going to an event and not researching isn't the right word, but not really like reading into who it was that I was programmed with. Because then when I met them and I wanted to talk to them, I didn't have many frames of reference of the kind of writer that they are, the kind of spaces that they move in. So doing that research beforehand and just like reading as simple as like reading the artist's bios before
which are
your
all
event.
on your event page.
Exactly.
Like,
or
right
like
there,
if they've reading any work that like of theirs that might sound interesting. So that then you have a starting point for that conversation.
Yeah. When we brief artists, we put them in a group email specifically for that reason, is to have them interact with each other. And I think it's very easy to not. I personally am a very bad email replier, not as an arts worker, but as an artist. So like it's two different sides, right? But yeah, and even just like being in a group chat, we've definitely had people create their own little like writers groups and stuff like that, where they like send each other feedback or like stuff like that. I think it's and I definitely had another and then it's just gone.
Yeah. If it comes back, interrupt me. But the other thing that I was going to say is, if it does, I'm hoping that it does. I was also going to say that, yes, what you'd said about like attending the workshops are great. Oh, I had a thought that had just also escaped me. Oh, is that like maybe I'm trying to think of how to word this without it sounding like I'm being real rigid, but be quite careful in the events that you choose to attend, or like know yourself well enough to know if something if an event is one that you're going to get something out of, if it's up your alley or not. Like sometimes you might in theory really like the concept of an event, but then you get there and you're like, oh, actually this isn't what I do at all. Or take at the same time kind of take that risk if you know that you're struggling with writing fiction and it's not a genre that you would typically interact with. There's an event right there for free where you can give it a go, and if it doesn't work, that's fine, and you can put it down again. But it's quite non-committal as well, to just attend an event, dislike it, and then leave after it's done, and now you've learned something about yourself and the way that you like to write.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's equally as important, right? Is knowing what isn't for you. Yeah.
Exactly. I just feel like it can be overwhelming sometimes to look through a program, or as a writer, like there's so many different styles that you can write in, and not knowing what yours is I think a big part of a big learning curve, I guess, of being an early career writer.
I think our festival specifically is like a big tool for discovery, right? Whether it's discovering the other people around you who are writing in, similar interests or similar areas or whatever, or people who aren't, who are completely like, or discovering something new. I think it's a really lovely way to do that. Yeah.
So we'd mentioned introducing yourself to artists and reading their bios simply before the event, but also, are there other tips on preparing for an event before it happens if you are programmed in something?
Yes, but before I mention that, I was just going to say the other thing is read the event properly as well, because like the event will tell you what it is, and it's really funny when people when an event doesn't meet someone's expectations for a reason that is like kind of baffling because it says on the tin what it is. I had a really hard time. I don't know if it's just because I have it's about to do an obscure quote that I don't think will land. But because of the way that I think, my I really struggled with like waffly, flowery programs. Didn't make any sense to me. I had no idea what the fuck I was getting into, what I was going to. And I was like, as soon as I like got into a position somewhere where I was writing copy for events, I was like, I'm just going to say what it is because I want people to come to it.
Yes.
Yeah. So hopefully if an event is good, or if a copywriter is good, if a program is good, they will tell you what the event is and what you can expect.
Yes.
From the get-go.
And just going back to bios, like your bio should be the exact same, like no flowery language that's abstract, because that doesn't help people learn about who you are. So specifics are great. Where you are, what you think about, what it is you like to read, what it is you like to write.
I should probably update my bio with what I like to read and write, but
I really need to update mine. I wrote mine like 4 years ago and haven't touched it. I've like made slight tweaks since. But I need to scrap it and start again.
Well, I think a lot of people say this, and this is true of mine. Mine started off really long and it's just gotten shorter and shorter and shorter throughout my career. As an arts worker, more so than a writer, but but preparing for an event, I would say really basic stuff like read your piece out loud, because you'll find if you can, to another person, but that's kind of hard. But yeah, space where there's no distractions, and perhaps in front of a mirror if you want, but I've never done that, but I know that some people do, and musicians do, because that'll help you find what you might trip over if you didn't read it out loud first, kind of thing, and then you're prepared. Timing yourself. It's really, really frustrating when I love a short performance. Beautiful. When someone reads overtime, it stuffs everyone else up. It's really disrespectful to your other artists in your event who have stuck to, say it's a 5-minute limit and you read for 10. You've read for double what everyone else has, it's disrespectful to the other artists on the lineup. It's disrespectful of the organizers. I know that it sounds really like I'm being like, do, but, we time things down to like the minute for a reason. And you might not know what that is. So just if you're briefed that you can't go over a certain amount of time, don't go over that amount of time. Cut your piece, or say you're reading an excerpt, whatever. Read something else. For us, for EWF, we brief people and we program people, usually with the understanding that they will write something new for the event, but it's not a strict rule or anything like that. People are certainly welcome to read other pieces if they want, or things that they've already written. That's totally great as well. I would say see who else is on your lineup. And I would also say pick out your outfit well ahead of time. I know that sounds really silly, but it's really important. And I don't mean like for your aesthetic appearance, although, that's great. It really helps take that, like that decision fatigue kind of stuff. Like figure out how to get there, figure out what time you're leaving, if you're taking public transport, if you're driving or whatever, figure out what you're wearing, like check the weather, all of these things that you can prepare for ahead of time so that you don't have to stress about them in the lead up to or in the moment. I think anything that you can do to eliminate like variables or like questions. I mean, I know we don't control the weather, but like, you've got an option for if it's raining, if it's not raining, kind of thing. I think that's one that's really stressful, especially because if you're going to be like presenting to an audience, you want to feel comfortable in what you're wearing.
Well, it's interesting what you said about practicing in front of a mirror, because I have
Mm.
never done that before, but I
Me
think I should
neither.
start because I make really like my face tenses in such a weird way when I read,
Yeah.
and I hate it. I look back over photos of me reading and I can't stand the way that I look.
Yeah.
Not because of what I'm wearing or how I'm styled. It's like my face sits funny when I'm performing. Um,
I
so
pull really bitchy faces. I already have a bit, but it's like there's one of me doing a reading where I'm like that,
Mhm.
and I'm just like, oh no.
Yeah, and obviously you're
But
not
yeah,
trying like, you're not intending to look that way, but it's like
no.
you're tense and if you're nervous, it
Yeah.
shows. So,
The other thing
yeah.
that I just wanted to quickly add in there is also if you have anything that's going to make, if you have something like that you know will help you, mention it. So if
Mm,
it's a seat, you need to have a seat on the stage.
mm,
That's no problem. I think sometimes people get really nervous, like, oh, can I have a seat? Like, yes, absolutely.
yeah,
Big mood. Totally relate. Doesn't matter what you need it for, or why you need it. You need a seat. You need a
yeah.
whatever it is. Yeah. Ask for any accommodations that you think will help you.
Mm. It's also, like, really normal to get up on stage and say to the audience, like, "Hey, feeling a little bit lightheaded because this is my first time performing.
Oh,
Sorry if I stutter," and then start.
at our program launch, I started off with, "I'm really sweaty," because I was
Yeah,
really
yeah.
sweaty and I was really conscious of it because I could feel it.
Mhm.
And then people were like, "Why did you say that? We couldn't notice." I was like, "Because I would be thinking about it." And as soon as I
Exactly,
said it,
exactly.
it was out there, it was gone. And I wasn't wondering, "Oh,
Yeah,
can people see that I'm sweating?" Because, like, I've already addressed it.
totally, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's I think maybe that feeds into what you were saying about festivals not being as intimidating as we think
Yeah.
they are. Like, you can mention these things when you sit down on a panel or when you're performing that you're feeling a little
Yeah.
bit off and nervous if that is the case. Or if you've got a raspy voice and you're nervous about
Mm.
someone, like, thinking that you sound really croaky, be like, "Sorry, I'm just
Mm.
recovering from a cold." It's
Yeah.
yeah. Mention the things that are making you nervous as long as you don't get super carried away with that. It's just a disclaimer at the
Yeah.
beginning if it needs to be there.
Well,
Yeah, we
like
have
we said
time
before with our
for
cat.
oh, yeah. Yes, exactly, exactly. But Fred's been very well behaved actually, which is
Yeah, so
surprising.
is
He's just
Sybil. I don't
sitting on
know
the couch. Yeah.
where she is.
We've got time for a question or two if anyone has any, put them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll wrap up.
Mhm.
Um, I'm hoping there not being any questions is a good sign. It means we've answered everything you
I
guys were
hope so.
thinking.
I hope so. But also, yeah, for EWF specifically, like not to plug it, but also to plug it, we have a call out. We announce it through our social media and on our website. But the best way is like to keep up with us is through our e-news.
Mm,
If you subscribe to because we don't just put our own stuff on there, we put all the like other opportunity, not all, but we curate a list of opportunities and all of that sort of stuff and things that we've read, like in our team, because our team is very small.
mm.
And so, yeah, that's a really good resource. Pardon me as well,
Yeah,
for knowing
totally.
what's going on. And we're pretty detailed with what we ask for.
Yeah.
And we always put a blog post Q&A up with it as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think we'll
Cool.
end it there. Thanks everyone,
Yes. Thanks,
for listening in, and
everybody.
thanks, Ruby, for all of your insights. It was a very good chat. I'm feeling
I hope
even
so.
me, I feel revived from that. I wanted to
Well, I'm
ask, I know
glad.
you plugged the artist call out, but do you have anything specific to you versus EWF that you might like to plug quickly?
I
Tell us what
guess.
you're working on.
I mean, no, I just all I have is Against Disappearance, which you are also in, but we both have
Yes.
essays in this beautiful collection. That's see, this is the thing. Being this is my this is show and tell time now. This is my rubber scorpion. I've got a clay scorpion there too. Anyway, yeah, being in I write something once a year,
Mhm.
basically if I'm lucky. So I'm hoping I'm working on something at the moment that will hopefully turn into something else.
Mm,
But the other thing that I will plug is Je Soy Collective. YoSoyCollective.com is our website. We're on Instagram as Yo Soy Arts, I think. So it's SOY collective. If you put that into Google, whatever, it should come up. We do events and stuff, multidisciplinary arts for Latin American people based primarily here in
Great. Thanks, Ruby. And just as a reminder for everyone, this session will be available on YouTube as a resource afterwards, and the captions will be uploaded in the coming days. And join us tomorrow on Wednesday, the 12th of July, where I'll be sitting down with Michaela Sahad to discuss the way through to a fruitful and sustainable writer's life, live on Express Media's YouTube again. Also, the next season of Toolkits will be opening for application in the coming weeks, so keep an eye out and apply. You can participate in other streams if you've done nonfiction with me this time and you've got graphic narratives opening up and you're interested in it, you should apply to it. The other streams are great. I get sad when I facilitate because I can't apply and attend the other ones. But that's it. Thank you so much, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this chat as much as I did.
Thank you. Bye.